I was in a very small town called Mineola, Texas, about 80 miles southeast of Dallas, 4,500 people at the most, and that's if you believe the Chamber of Commerce lie. Uh, it was hill country. It went to the 10th grade until 2 years before I got to the 10th grade. And then it went to the 12th grade. When it was 10th grade, you then had to go to another town if you wanted to do 11 and 12 and graduated from high school. You can clearly see there was absolutely zero interest on any future for any of us connected with that school. The school was called Mineola Colored High, and that was it. That's where I graduated from. I actually got a scholarship to an agricultural and mechanical college called Prairie View A&M in Hempstead, Texas, and I was shipped off immediately on graduating from high school because you had to participate in the farming and the raising of the food that this black college used to feed the people who were in attendance. I got there, and within 2 weeks, being in those places where you eat family style, I was at a table with 7 athletes and me. And I looked around the dining room every meal, and it was the same way. There was always 7 athletes and a nerd type. I decided to organize the nerds, and that resulted in getting kicked out of school. And when I went back to Mineola, when they shipped me home, my mother was so devastated that her son embarrassed the family that she agreed to let me come live in California with my uncle. An uncle she had real trouble adjusting to because he never had a job. So she was concerned that I might end up being like my uncle. And some people say in the world of politics, you did turn out like your uncle. But nevertheless, that's how I got to California. So when you ask the question, in any of the things that I've done or ultimately became a part of, did I envision? Absolutely not.
So who are your heroes? Who inspired you then?
Well, you got to know that as you begin to do what you do, and I got here in August 4th, 1951, my goal when I got here instantly was to go to Stanford and become a math teacher. That's what I wanted to do. My perspective on achievement were teachers, period. That was probably, for most African Americans living in the South, and in particular in Texas, you either were prospectively a preacher, undertaker, or teacher, and that was it. There was no other real gig that you could aspire to. And so I decided I wanted to be a teacher. And I'd heard and read something about something called Stanford. And so when I got here, I went down there, August, mind you, 1951. And I got there and started answering questions for the admission people. And by the time I got to the end of the 4 or 5 people, they said, you know, you have not taken any admission, any of the admission tests. We looked at your various documents showing the high school you went to, and it does not appear as if you've had 1/4 of the subjects that would be required for somebody to enter Stanford. You seem enthusiastic, but you don't seem ready to enter college, and so we don't think we can accept you. Well, I was pleased that they said that because I had already looked at the cost associated with it. And and in those days, they didn't have student loans and scholarships, and they were not concerned about any of those kinds of things, I don't think. But at the end of the line, there was this one guy, tall, white guy, slightly balding. His name was Duncan Gillies. When I got to him for conversation, he said, listen, I really do think you have a lot of talent. I don't work here full time. I'm a part-timer here. I work at a place called San Francisco State College in the Haight, not too far from where you live in San Francisco, based upon your address. They're desperate for students. I can get you into that school without any other qualifications, and it's your job to stay in that school by getting good grades. So and I said, well, how about the money issue? He said, I'm glad you asked that. San Francisco State College is desperate for students. You don't have to worry about the money either. It's a little operation in San Francisco, and that's how I got hooked up. So yes, Duncan Gillies was a great inspiration for me. As soon as I got to San Francisco State, which was like the next 3 or 4 days, it was very clear that the professors there had an abiding conviction that that state college was ultimately going to become what it is today, something far greater on the educational side, and they were determined, and they literally started giving us counseling, all of us, and what have you. I quickly dispensed with wanting to be a math teacher. I looked at what I didn't have and what I'd have to go some other place to get in order to compete in the math program, and I decided, particularly after I met John Burton, who was next to me in line. They lined you up alphabetically. And I met this guy, John Burton, who was, because it was Brown Burton, and he wanted to sell me football cards.
Trading cards?
Absolutely, perfect arrangement, because I was on my way. So he introduced me to the world of democratic politics. In those days, it was actually independent more than democratic politics, because he was far left of anything in the world. I didn't know anything about left or right, but he was far beyond any reality when it came to, and so he inspired me. And one after another, circumstances became such that those are the kind of people that I constantly met, constantly interacted with, and constantly became associated with, and I long left being a math teacher, long time ago. My mother had convinced me that if I was coming to California, because of the uncle that I was going to live with, I had to join church immediately, and she wanted to hear from the pastor that I had joined church immediately. And lo and behold, that turned out to be Hamilton Boswell over at Jones Methodist Church on Post Street. Now, I didn't know anything about Jones Methodist Church. I had gone to CME Church in Mineola, and I did not distinguish between Jones Methodist and CME.
Right.
I just went to the first church and immediately signed up when they call you to come up and join. I immediately went up and joined church and met Ham Boswell, and told Ham Boswell, now you got to write my mother. and it's too bad we didn't have
Email.
That's right.
Email would have
no,
helped.
better than that. You want to have a
photograph.
selfie.
Exactly.
That's right. Of me standing next to
The
like
altar.
this.
Right.
This would please my mother. Well, and so Boswell did send a note to my mother directly, letting her know that I was there, but he got a commitment from me that I would show up every Sunday morning. And sure enough, I did show up every Sunday morning, because being new to this town, I didn't know anybody. So going to church and to a community center were the first two things, the playgrounds, that I wanted to do to meet other kids, and in particular meet other girls. So it was a godsend that I got hooked up so quickly. Jones Methodist is 1 block off of Fillmore Street. My uncle hung out on Fillmore Street, and it was just perfect, because I could leave Jones Methodist and go to Fillmore and have reasons to be able to go back to Jones Methodist ultimately. So it was a good arrangement for me.
So what did you study, and how did the political thing begin? I mean, so you knew you weren't going to be a math teacher. So how did you decide that you were going to have a role in political life?
As I said, John Burton was Phil Burton's brother. He was the younger version.
Yeah.
And he was into politics. At that time, I believe that Vince Hallinan, was running for president on the Progressive Party ticket, which was like the communist ticket. And, and Burton was very much a part of all of that operation. I simultaneously joined the NAACP.
right.
Others got me involved in the NAACP. I became a part of something called the Urban League. All these things I'd never heard of. And my goal was within a year to know more about this city than you could ever learn in that same short period of time, which meant you had to join lots of organizations, you had to attend lots of events like this,
right.
et cetera. And that's what I did. And that's how I became, literally within a year, involved in every aspect of life in this city as I could do it. And in those days, San Francisco was still a town that was segregated. We were still living in, black people lived in 3 neighborhoods. They lived in the Fillmore, they lived in Hunts Point, Bayview, and they lived in the Ingleside. The Ingleside were the black people that owned their own single entity homes. The people in the Western Addition were living in, they were renters in multiple dwellings.
Right.
And the people in Hunts Point lived in the public housing, Petroria Hill and Hilltop and Double Rock and all those things. And they had, like not a great reputation. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time out there. But I did in the other 2 and got to know people, became involved. Every Sunday, practically, there was some event in a church. The NAACP met in the church once a month, and there were major lectures about inequality and the struggle that was going on in the world to change that. This was all before Brown versus the Board of Education, which was not till 1954.
Right.
It also, you go to the once-a-month meetings with the Young Democrats, and there would be some speaker coming, and usually it was somebody running for office, already holding office, or something of that nature. And so it was an enlightenment and for me to be quickly involved in all the things that I'd never, ever heard of, period. So when you ask me what did I study at San Francisco State, they made it really easy because the first year of your experience, first 2 years actually, they have mandatory requirements. You got a general education.
Right.
You could take some options, you could exercise some options, but in most cases, it was a pre-assigned program, like these restaurants that serve fixed menus. San Francisco State served a fixed menu for education purposes, and that was good because it gave me time to really determine what I could do.
Were you going to all these places at the same time that you're taking the classes at San Francisco State?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no.
So you're getting an education in the classroom, but you're also getting a tremendous education on what San Francisco was like in the 1950s.
Absolutely.
So when was the first time you were actually on the ballot? Like how did that?
Oh, no. I was 60. 1960.
Yeah, exactly. After law school, right?
After law school.
Yeah.
1960, I ran for the County Central Committee. I was on the Burton slate for the County Central Committee, and I won it. And the County Central Committee in those days was the starter point. 2 years later, I ran for the California State Assembly, and I lost to a 22-year incumbent, Edward Gaffney. I lost by 1,000 votes, slightly under 1,000 votes. 2 days after I lost to Ed Gaffney in '62, I went back and went to every house in the district thanking them for having voted for me. Wow. Well, obviously, they had not voted for me.
Some of them did.
But they didn't. Yeah, that's right. Some of them did. But they were so carried away with the fact that I would come back when he had gone off to do his work in Sacramento. Every day, I spent some time during the course of that day ringing doorbells. 2 years later, in '64, I beat him by 4,000 votes. All because I had just outworked him, period. And by then, in the world of politics, I knew that it was all work because I had been, from the time in college to the time running and being on the ballot, I had been a part of the Democratic movement statewide. and the Democratic movement statewide had been inspired in part by then Governor Brown, not this,
Right,
not,
his dad,
not
yeah.
Jerry's father,
Yeah.
and other people like Tom Lynch, who was the district attorney of San Francisco and ultimately the attorney general of the state of California. Phil Burton had been a great teacher for all of us because Phil Burton ran for the state assembly, and the guy he was running against died in like the 28th or 29th of September, and he still beat Burton. And Burton lost to a dead man. I mean, Burton, 2 years later, Burton came back and beat alive stiff. And so the process of politicking had become really very much a part of my life, and by the time '64 came around, and I beat Ed Gaffney by more than 4,000 votes, it was just a wonderful way to do it.
Yeah, it seemed like it was just a moment of real change in terms of how San Francisco's political and cultural life, what was happening here. And I always wonder what it was like just being a young man and first arriving in Sacramento. You didn't know that you were going to live there for the next 30 years. But what was your impression of it, and how did it change over the time that you were there in the state legislature?
Well, I must tell you, going to Sacramento and becoming a member of the legislature in 1964, I had the same kind of confrontational experience I'd had at Prairie View A&M. When I arrived, Jesse Marvin Unruh was the speaker, the legendary speaker. Nationwide, he was probably the best known speaker. He had supported his member, Ed Gaffney. And I had beaten his member.
Yeah.
No one had ever voted against Unruh for speaker. And when the first thing you do is you get sworn in, and then the first action is to elect the head of the body. In this case, somebody nominated Jess Unruh, somebody seconded, and then they started to call the roll. And when they got to me, I voted against Unruh. That froze everybody. Everybody looked and wanted to know who is this crazy lunatic? And John Burton, without any, we had no plans as such. John Burton's name came up like 2 later. He joined me.
Wow.
And then some really nutty guy from San Jose decided, his name was Bill Stanton. He was a PhD in economics, probably the most brilliant member of the California legislature.
Yeah.
He had been waiting for years for somebody to vote against Unruh and cover for him. So when they got to him, for the first time, 3 people voted against Jess Unruh. Now you got to know that there was more attention paid to me in the other 2 no Unruh votes because nobody had ever done that. And people wanted to know why, what was the challenge. And I did it because he had been against me in San Francisco.
Yeah.
But I couldn't exactly say that. And so I kind of pulled a Trump. I said I looked at his record and I lied through my teeth as to why I had voted. And the other 2 guys said, well, we were with him. So Unruh was only angry with me. He considered those 2 guys being misled. But that started my operation in Sacramento.
Right.
Obviously, the Republicans had been waiting patiently for some evidence of displeasure in the Democratic caucus. Suddenly, I was being invited for coffee by these farmers, invited for coffee
Right, from the
by these
Central Valley.
business. Yeah. I mean, I became, like the talk of the town. Everybody wanted to know this Willie Brown guy. Who is he, and what is he about, and how soon will he be challenging Unruh for the speakership? It was amazing. And Jess, of course, retaliated. He proceeded to give me a very bad office. I actually shared an office with another member who disliked Unruh. That fellow's name was Jack Fenton. What Unruh didn't understand is when you do things of that nature, you are putting together people who will begin to plan.
Exactly, yeah.
And so suddenly we became kind of a anti-Unruh terrorist group. we were set about to embarrass him. Every member gets assigned to committees. Honor assigned me to what he considered to be the most difficult committees I could ever be challenged with. He put me on health because a guy named Byron Rumford, a black man from East Bay, was an honor guy. He was the chair of the health committee, and he ran an operation in which all the decisions were made the night before in a hotel room across the street.
Right.
And if you were not invited, you had no idea how they had planned the whole operation. Well, I got word that that's how they did it. And so what did I do? I studied every bill in health. And so I could ask questions that would embarrass every member who was following that leadership.
Yeah.
I became really a pain and one or two of the members on that health committee loved the idea because suddenly things that they had been trying to do on health, no one would even allow them to bring it up. Well, since I wasn't at dinner the night before, I could legitimately bring up any subject matter. And so I began to do that, and I began to develop friendships with people like Leroy Green and a couple of other people on the health committee, plus the Republicans. They literally zeroed in on me on the health committee. The doctors in this state, hospitals, went crazy. It became very clear that I could not become ill. There'd be no place I could go get any treatment whatsoever, that if I did. He put me on a committee on education that he thought was a nothing committee. Nobody ever did think, the teachers had just begun to organize.
Yeah.
They had just begun to become unionized. And when he put me on the education committee, it was like overnight I suddenly became the teacher's friend. I became the guy that the teacher could count on to call saying, and it turned out that the chair, Gus Garrigus, was the chair of that committee. And he had been given that committee assignment not because he wanted it, but because nobody else wanted it, apparently. He was not in great favor with Andrea, and he was kind of a quiet, gentle giant, and he just loved the idea that he could slip me a note, and blindly I would read the note aloud. So now I'm on education with great amount of attention. He also put me on government efficiency and economy. Government efficiency and economy handles all of the license for all of the categories that were not, in fact, on the medical side. So here I am. I'm in government efficiency and economy, where all the other licenses are. I'm on education, and I'm on the committee that handle health license.
Yeah.
Then he put me on the law committee, because all the lawyers went on the judiciary committee.
Right.
And that's where the lawyers were. The lawyers were not great honor people anyway, because he had been squelching them forever. And so suddenly I'm on 4 committees, all geared to potential honor overthrow people.
Right.
And it was just perfect. I had such a ball. I was rated in the first year as the #1 freshman in the legislature. It was incredible to have that much attention given to somebody who came, and I was Phil Burton's protege. And Phil Burton had been a thorn in Honor's side when Phil Burton was there. Phil Burton now had gone on to Congress. And Phil Burton was a genius at legislation. You would have a bill, and it would have a number and maybe 3 lines when it started out. By the time it was voted upon in the Senate, it would be 382 pages covering everything that you've ever wanted to hear. And that's how we got welfare reform in the state of California. It had been gotten past UNRRA and all the people who wanted to stop it by virtue of not letting them know when you were putting things in that they might have a problem with. Phil Burton did all of that, and we, Burtonites, understood that and had been told by him how to do it, and we began to do it. And so suddenly, my first 2 years were just fabulous.
Yeah.
Because UNRRA decided he needed to seek peace. He came to me and said that we're going to give chairmanships to, now you're a sophomore.
Yeah.
We're going to give chairmanships, and I'm looking forward to a great chairmanship. He gave me the chairmanship on legislative representation. What the hell is legislative representation? Nobody had ever had the chairmanship of that committee for years. And it was the only committee that was actually in the law.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the rules. It was in the law. And it was a committee that had been set up when Artie Samish ran the halls of the legislature. Artie Samish was a very powerful lobbyist for the railroad industry, and he at one time controlled the legislature. As a matter of fact, there was a national publication where he had the entire body of the legislature on his knee, as if they were his children,
right.
showing
As a
how
cartoon.
powerful he really was. It was
Yeah.
a cartoon, but showing how powerful he really was. And so the reaction was, as always, somebody put in and said legislative representation to regulate lobbyists. But nobody had ever bothered with that committee. I, of course, read it, and it said regulate lobbyists. And Honora realized, after he had made me chair that committee, that he still had the right to name the other members. So he put himself and the Speaker pro tem, and he had the Senate he had two other people put on. So there were five people on that committee, me and four hostiles. It was just awful. I couldn't even call a committee meeting because you needed a quorum. Well, I decided, like Trump, I wrote rules and published them. And one of the rules was you had to wear a badge if you were a lobbyist, and you had to list all the people that you represented.
That's
in the
great.
halls. It took about 24 hours for Jess Arner to come to me and said, listen, that chairmanship you have, would you like a better chairmanship?
So how
That's the beginning of my career.
and then how did you become speaker? I mean, it was
Well, first of all, as usual, I was very close to a guy named Bob Moretti. He was one of the people elected with me in there were 10 of us, 5 Reaps and 5 Democrats. Burton, Brown, Moretti, Fenton, and the fellow named from I think it was from Santa Barbara. So 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, small class. In that process, Moretti became very friendly. Honor said to Moretti, you got to watch Brown and Fenton and Burton. 3 of the 5 were potential hostiles. Well, Moretti fell in love with us. We hung out together. We went dinner almost every night, movies. We played baseball and basketball together, all the things that young guys do. And suddenly Moretti was a great friend. When the Republicans took over, and I think it was maybe 68 or 70, they took over the House by numbers. They elected a guy named Bob Monaghan as Speaker, but they only won by 1. 2 years later, Democrats won the House back. Moretti had led the fight to get that to happen. Honor had gone on to run for governor and then for treasurer. We elected Moretti. I nominated Moretti. I wanted to be majority leader. Moretti says, no, you ought to be Ways and Means. I can't trust anybody to run the budget operation, the spending operation, except you. You're smarter than all these other guys. Go be Ways and Means chair. It'll mean more ultimately in your career. There's never been a black guy Ways and Means chair. There's never been a Ways and Means chair from San Francisco. Go do that job. I reluctantly accepted, and I'm glad he did that because that did become the foundation for my ultimate influence in the halls of the legislature and in government in California. Because as Ways and Means, I literally determined 80 to 85% of every bill or every measure that passed and every law, and I literally did 100% of the funding because we didn't have 2 finance operations, we had 1, Ways and Means. And the results were that I built up friendships with Republicans and conservative Democrats because I was trustworthy. I would work with people to get the result that they needed to have happen in their respective districts if it didn't harm San Francisco. and I had a group of loyal followers among the Democratic membership. And so when it was decided that Moretti was going to run for governor in 1974 as Speaker, he did not have to resign. So he left the House to me. He didn't resign. He should have resigned. He was beaten badly by Jerry Brown and 15 other people. There was like a lot of people running. Moretti ran. He was kind of a lackluster candidate for governor, and he ran fourth, I think. In the meantime, the other side had been planning to oust him as Speaker. If in February he had quit when he announced, I would have been made the Speaker in 1974. But he didn't. He decided in June, when he had lost, 3 days after he lost, he announced publicly, without clearing it with me and my friends, that he would resign at a certain time period in June. Well, that resignation came on the heels of his defeat. Jerry Brown was already locked up with a guy who was going to become my opponent, a fellow named Leo McCarthy from San Francisco, for the speakership. And sure enough, Leo McCarthy was able to convince my roommate, a fellow named Leon Ralph, who was supposed to nominate me. Leon kind of knew that I would never make him a significant member because he didn't have the talent. And I expressed myself in that regard. He made a deal with Leo to become the rules chair if he would vote with Leo. I lost by 1 vote. And he failed to nominate me. Nominations are open. And I looked over at Leon and said, what's the story? And with that, Jack Knox out of Richmond got up and nominated me. And as soon as the vote was cast, I lost by the 1 vote.
Wow.
March Fong Yu, the first Asian woman elected, who used to be superintendent of schools and that, with her purse, she got up right in the meeting and went over and whacked Leon Ralph on the head, beat him on the head with her purse because he had double-crossed all of us. So I lost the speakership. Well, McCarthy bounced me off of Ways and Means, put me in the smallest office in the building and what have you, and I decided I'm gone. I came back to San Francisco every night. I'd go up on Monday, wouldn't go back to the legislature again till Wednesday so I could be there for Thursday, and that was it. All of a sudden, it became clear that there was a plot to oust McCarthy. McCarthy was also concerned about the honesty among some of his chairmen. He came to me and said, listen, Reverend Tax, I'm going to fire that guy. I'm going to move all these suspected inappropriate actions over to Reverend Tax, and I need you to chair Reverend Tax. Your reputation previously, all I want you to do is just vote for me. I said, hey, Leo, I'm not running against you. Don't even worry about it. I will be in every way what you need to have on Reverend Tax. But you've got to do me a favor. He said, what's that? I said, move the committee meeting to Monday, because I'm not staying in Sacramento overnight. I'm going to come up on Monday morning, be on the floor. You don't have 2 days of session. I'll come back on Thursday, but I don't want to stay up here. And so I will come up, and he did it. And so I became chair of Reverend Tax. Lo and behold, I'm chair of Reverend Tax when Prop 13 passes. So now I drew the challenge of trying to implement Prop 13, which we had all opposed and which Jerry Brown opposed, but 2 days after it passed, you thought Jerry Brown carried it. He was so involved in trying to make it. And so I wrote the legislation that implemented Prop 13 in this state. That's where you got renters tax credits. I did all those things. It's part of the duty and the responsibility. In the meantime, there was a plan and a plot afloat to get rid of Leo, headed by a guy out of Los Angeles named Howard Berman. They had become disenchanted with how he was handling things, and Leo had evidenced a desire to run for the U.S. Senate anyway, so they really thought he was losing interest in maintaining the House. And they set about to oust Leo. They decided to come to me. They came to me and said, listen, we think you can do a lot better than the rev and tax if you'll side with us. Your 4 or 5 devotees, if they vote with us, we can oust McCarthy right away. So I don't work that way. Under no circumstances. I took this job of being the chair of rev and tax. I did all the things that I've done. I'm sticking with McCarthy, and as soon as you walk out of here, I'm calling him to tell him you're planning his demise. Well, the war was on, because from that moment on, the legislature was in great turmoil. Leo McCarthy one day came to the caucus meeting and announced that since he no longer had a majority of the caucus members, he was going to quit as speaker. And I advised him that the rules didn't say that. The rules say once you are speaker, until the next election, you hold that job unless 41 people fire you. I said, I only count 25 people who want to fire you. You got the others. So the light went off. And so from that moment on, we were at war till the next election. When the next election, Leo still didn't have a majority of the Democratic caucus, and he was locked in to the idea he wouldn't be speaker unless he had all Democrats. And I said, be my guest. I will be speaker if I have X number of Democrats and all the Republicans. That's how I became speaker. Right. I got 23 Democrats out of 47, and I got 28 Republicans out of 33. Wow. So my 51 votes was the first time in the history of the legislature that a combination of Democrats and Republicans had elected a speaker. I developed a relationship with the Republicans through the Ways and Means process, through the rev and tax process, through the years of always treating every member equally, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. I never treated them differently because I thought once you were a member, you were a member. You were not a Democrat or a Republican. And I never abandoned any of my advocacy. For an example, the whole business of the rights and the independence and the treatment of people who were considered to be gay or lesbians, I, in 1969, introduced the first piece of legislation anywhere in the country to remove criminal penalties for sexual acts between consenting adults.
Wow.
Period. It took me 5 years.
Yeah.
It took 5 years of constantly doing that, and obviously I horse traded in every way, but I finally got it passed.
Yeah.
Period.
You know,
and so,
this is so interesting to me, and it reminds me of being in Sacramento and what. But there's so much experience that's involved that was necessary for you to. I mean, you had to be that person on the Ways and Means Committee chair in order for the rest of your life to unfold. I mean, and you do have an expertise in political processes. And I look at Donald Trump, who's just so new to everything, and he has none of the kinds of experiences that you're talking about. You know, how is he going to be able to function? In the office? And maybe you could, before you get to that question, tell us a little bit about how he got there. Like, how did we get to this place where we are, where Donald Trump, a person who really made his name as a reality TV star, became the president of the United States? So how did we get here, and what are the prospects for somebody who really doesn't have the kind of political experience that you have?
well, let's start with, I don't think Trump will ever be a quality president, period. It's impossible. And it's impossible because at his age and his previous history, his interest in the world of public policy making, his interest in every aspect of rules and regulations in a democracy are virtually non-existent. And he is not going to get there being the most powerful person that he is, hiring the kind of people that he has hired. I believe that you are, if an elected official, you ultimately become the end product of the people you're able to get to work for you and actually do the real work, read the documents, review them, and give you candid advice and candid information. Donald Trump is none of that. He doesn't have the capacity to do that. He got elected through a fluke.
Yeah, that's a question I have. So did the Electoral College elect Donald Trump, or did they vote against Hillary Clinton?
They voted against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Donald Trump was elected as an anti-Clinton vote, not a pro. You couldn't, just go back and look at all the things. Obviously, there are probably a third of the people in the country are Trumpites. There are people who are ill-informed. There are people who are uncaring. There are people who, in many cases, are warped on every aspect of religion. They are people who, for whatever reason, are beyond repair and beyond correction. That crowd was for Trump. They have never, ever been able to orchestrate that into a majority anywhere, whether it's dog catcher or whether it's a school board member or whether it's a member of the Assembly, Congress. They've never been able to put together among themselves a sufficient number of people to become a majority in this democracy. However, they have been successful at being associated with other folk who are not part of them, but become part of them in the protest operation against individual candidates. Hillary Clinton generated that kind of relationship among the ne'er-do-wells, as I call them politically, and they had an opportunity to speak collectively. At the same time, for whatever reason, many, many good people either stayed home or threw their vote away on some lark, understanding and believing that there could never be a majority for somebody as unskilled and uninformed as Donald Trump. And they were obviously wrong,
Right.
totally and completely wrong. They were waiting for a Messiah that
So if the Democrats had chosen Bernie Sanders, how would things have rolled out, do you think? If
I suspect Bernie Sanders would have done better in making sure that the crowd that's anti-Hillary didn't show up.
Right.
The crowd that's anti-Hillary didn't do any of the things that they ultimately did. And I'm guessing that Bernie would have beaten Trump. I think anyone would have beaten Trump. I think Bloomberg would have beaten them all if he had decided to run it. It would have been the first time an independent could actually run. Unfortunately for all of us, you should know that probably the most ready person ever for the presidency is Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton was more talented. She had held more significant positions and discharged each of those positions with great care and great intellectual capacity than anybody else who'd run, including her husband. I think she was brighter than Bill. Just think about it. Hillary Clinton undertook the incredible task of trying to get health care for everybody back in the 90s when he first was elected. She didn't do the first lady stuff. She went about trying to do what Lyndon Johnson did with the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act. Hillary tried to do that for health care. So Hillary really was just incredible in terms of her skills and her ability. But simultaneously, she did not push friendliness. She did not push charm. She did not push any of the things that lightweight politicians do naturally. And as a result of that, people had an aversion against her, and they don't know why. I do not understand how any woman could vote for Trump over Hillary. It just didn't make any sense whatsoever.
So we're starting to get some of the questions, so we're going to pick it up. I'm going to ask you more questions, and we're going to have shorter answers. Does that sound like a good plan?
Well, try it.
Okay, let's do it. Okay. You are a major architect of Mission Bay. Did you foresee the housing and economic boom it has brought?
Absolutely. I thought Mission Bay would do wonders for San Francisco. It would create a whole new neighborhood. I thought that in my private practice of law, because I represented the people who first envisioned Mission Bay. And then when they terminated my legal representation in the early 90s, I ultimately became the mayor. I went back to a fellow who had been gifted, I think, handling Tom Bradley in Los
Oh,
Angeles.
yeah, right.
And he had done a great job. He had been hired by CalPERS, who had bought the interest in that particular facility and in that particular dirt. And I went to him and said to him, you know, I think you ought to abandon everything you've done, all the planning that's previously been done. And if I can fix it so that we don't have to put up with the planning department interfering with the vision of producing an incredible research park, an incredible extension of the University of California's operation in the Mission Bay, and if we can, at the same time, put in at least 7,000 units of housing, with at least a third of those units being affordable, it would be a good deal.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
came back to me and said, I buy in. So then you need to know that that's going to cost you some free acreage, because the only way to get the University of California not to go to Brisbane or not to go to Alameda on Harbor Bay, we're going to have to give them land. I'm willing, as a city, to give them 1/3 of what you will give them. He agreed, and he gave them, I don't know, 29 or 30 acres. I gave him 13 acres. And then I got people like Gerson Baker and others to sign on to the idea of building the kind of thing that we now have in Mission Bay, period. And it is a magnificent, each of us ought to go just walk it. It's been
beautiful.
designed in
Yeah,
such a way
yeah.
that you can't drive it.
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that it was not going to be a shortcut to anywhere. You can't, as a matter of fact, you can't find your way by car in Mission Bay. We so
Google
designed
Maps
it
helps, though.
that we got 6,900 units of housing there. We've got the same amount of open space, not in one place, but the same amount of open space as Golden Gate Park
that's-
in Mission Bay. I mean, Mission Bay is an awesome operation. And then the University of California not only jumped at the idea of putting the research operation together, but they decided they wanted to expand on their Parnassus Hospital. And so they went out and acquired another piece of land right next door and got, I don't know, $2 billion or some other number to build
Right.
the new hospital.
So here's one question that's come up twice. What is your opinion on proposals that California leave the U.S. in response to the conflict of values with the Trump administration?
It's a great idea. You should know that in my early years in the legislature, I actually introduced a bill to divide California.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to make it into two states.
Right. Where's the
'Cause
border?
north and south. Well,
San Luis Obispo.
all the bad stuff we put. Probably Bakersfield south. And maybe might kick in Fresno here and there, but Bakersfield south for sure. I really thought that the state of California, Southern California and Northern California, 4 U.S. senators.
Oh, yeah.
It would be
Completely.
just fabulous.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be, and it would have been easy, I suspect. But I could not get that going. I finally gave up. I had a lot of great ideas. For an example, I said, under no circumstances should there be 3 separate airports or 3 or 4 separate ports.
Yeah.
Put them all under one port authority. And you decide that, you know, the short hoppers land in Oakland and San Jose. All the international long flights
Yeah.
out of San Francisco, and you have transportation between the 3 airports, and you have all, and in terms of the port authority, you put the port authorities. That shouldn't be an Oakland Port Authority, San Francisco,
Well,
Redwood.
that's a lot of problems in the Bay
That's
Area. I think.
Crazy, yeah.
There are a lot of problems in the Bay Area of just these different municipalities that are not coordinated.
That's right. And I also said years ago that don't let the counties opt out on transportation.
Oh, yeah, that's
we
the
ought to
part.
have a transportation
Yeah.
system for the 9 counties.
I agree.
We passed the law and we let them, you could opt out.
Yeah.
So BART became a 3-county system.
Exactly.
Contra Costa, Alameda, and San Francisco.
Yeah.
Now they're trying to add San Mateo
Yeah, Santa Clara.
and Santa Clara. But just think about it. If in those days when things were not as expensive, land was not as difficult to navigate, I mean, I had some great vision.
Well, here's a question. Here's a question about homelessness. So, homelessness is such a central issue for San Franciscans. What changes do you see? Do you see any kind of light on the horizon in terms of us being able to address this better?
Homelessness is not subject to being solved by one municipality.
Yeah.
Homelessness is as much of a regional issue as transportation or as some of the other things that are regional issues. When I served as mayor of this city, I tried to address the homeless issue, and I came away based on all of what my staff was doing and trying to do with the conclusion that you can manage it, but you can't abolish it, period. You can't get rid of it. The state law, the federal laws won't let you do that because you can't move people without people engaging in some conduct that meets the standard of their freedoms being imposed upon and being moved in such a fashion. And so you really do need to address the issue of poverty in general. You need to address the issue of multiple operations in the lives of people. There are people who are druggies, there are people with mental conditions, there are people with physical conditions, there are people incapable of ever caring for themselves. However, they don't commit any of the offenses that would give you the right to take their freedom. We need to revisit all those kinds of things if we're really going to deal with how to deal with the issue involving poverty that evidences itself with people sleeping on the streets. I am perplexed till this day, and I walk all over downtown San Francisco. I don't go west of Van Ness.
Yeah.
With all due respect. But I got to tell you that, and it's interesting, people sleeping on the streets don't go west of Van Ness.
That's true. I haven't seen so many in Pacific Heights. Alta Plaza Park.
Are you kidding me? You don't see any of them out there. But they go to special places. They'll go to Golden Gate Park, but now they've been run out of Golden Gate Park, so they're back downtown. At any rate, we just do not have the wherewithal, either legally or otherwise, nor do we have the political will that would allow us to address the issue. For an example, the whole business of being able to do the kind of thing with navigational centers that Mayor Lee is currently doing, that addresses the issue somewhat and permits us not to have to do what I see every day of people sleeping on the streets as I walk to work. There are people who regularly sleep the same spot every night, endangering themselves health-wise and otherwise. We just don't have the capacity to produce enough alternative locations. And in terms of that, I don't think we've ever tried to really govern effectively the internal operations of shelters or the internal operations of any of those things. There are many people on the streets whom I chat with that tell me they don't want to go to shelter. It's more dangerous than the streets. Well, obviously, we ought to address that in some kind of way if that happens to be true. The multiple diagnosis, you understand that probably in San Francisco, 25 to 40% of all the homeless people are in some manner veterans or veterans related. Just think, if we spend some attention and time with the Veterans Administration and with all that this nation should do for people who end up with problems associated with the war where they've killed other people and what have you, and they can't live with that anymore, and they're now taking drugs to deal with it and what have you, they become our problem as a city. They shouldn't be our problem as a city. We ought to be in partnership with the feds on things that can be done for veterans And believe me, the rules are different for veterans than they are for ordinary people.
Here's actually a question about the federal government too. It's just so there are a lot of changes with the Trump administration having to do with immigration, having to do with the EPA, et cetera. And the question here is, what do ordinary citizens do when there are these massive changes that are happening on the federal level? What do we do as Californian citizens to do our part to make sure that the best thing happens?
Politicians respond to pure, unadulterated numbers. We all want to be loved, and the best evidence of love is re-electing me. That's how you show love. So we need, as Californians, to become involved with wherever there is an opportunity to elect somebody that expresses our views and that's carrying our message throughout this land. And in 2018, there'll be a golden opportunity to do that. When I saw the millions of women marching on the 21st or 22nd of January, less than 60 days ago, and when I saw the number of people engaging in the protest movements, in most cases in a peaceful fashion, all I'd hoped for is that that was what I would see on Election Day, rather than post-election day. And if we could do that, we can change this country.
Yeah, that's great. One of the questions is, why can't California raise its taxes as the Fed cuts its spending and federal taxes? But
Because the politicians can't get reelected in their minds if they raise your taxes. I would think there's probably going to be some adjustment of that. However, that might be an even better opportunity. State of California, unlike North Carolina sends $1 to the feds and gets 7 back. State of California sends $1 to the feds and gets 40 cents back. It seems to me there should be some consideration given to the state of California, which is one of the great employers of people. The University of California and the educational systems, great employers of people. I am just guessing, I don't know the numbers, but I gotta believe that probably half of what's sent to the federal government comes from the employment process engaged in the state with public entities. The way in which the tax system works is the employer keeps the money that is supposed to go for taxes and to cover the taxes, and then quarterly sends it to the entity. State of California, you can't put them in jail, so why don't we just not send that money, put it in a trust account, and say, if you remove the kinds of things you're doing in healthcare and the kinds of things you're doing in education and the kinds of things you're doing in infrastructure and the environment, dollar for dollar, we're going to take it out of this trust account we have of your money so that we won't need to send you, and you can keep your money, and we'll keep ours. Obviously, there would be some confrontation. But so what? As long as it's not the ordinary citizen not remitting the taxes, it's the state not remitting the taxes. Can you see, were our governor, we would be having a lot of fun. I would be letting Trump know exactly what I have in my trust account that's his, and he can call me anytime for an exchange.
So why did all the pollsters get the election wrong last fall?
They're like the weathermen. And I think they may have been weather people at one time or something, because they were so far wrong. And I think they were wrong because they did not ask everybody. Yeah. I got more inquiries sent to my house for polls, for opinion purposes. I mean, almost every day there's another solicitation for a reaction. I know they're not doing that to everybody. I know they have selected me because I'm a regular voter. I know they've selected Amy because I've been responsive to comments about issues that are being put before the voters. And so these pollsters have a collection of people, almost like the Nielsen ratings, and that they want your reaction, and they then try to project your reaction as being the true reaction. The Trump people did something that's never been done. The Trump people went to people who had never answered a question before. And when they went to those people, they began to get the impression that those people were not the same as being reported by the pollsters. And the results were they dealt with those people and factored in their views, and the pollsters did not. And the results were the pollsters were totally and completely wrong. When Trump announced in the primary, for the primary, and I think it was probably May of 15, he said he was going to run. 2 weeks after that, a Willie Brown column predicted that Trump would win the Republican primary. He would win the Republican primary because I looked at the attractiveness of the other 16 opponents. None of them had more than 1 or 2%. Trump was the only one with double digits on the attractive side by virtue of his reality TV celebrity status.
Right.
So I knew that he would beat all those people, and he entertained all the way. I mean, he identified Bush, who was everybody's alleged favorite, as low energy and asleep. He identified Ted as lying Ted. He identified Marco as being small everywhere. He identified, I think he identified the woman as having a problem with her face. I mean, he really identified everybody.
Right.
And he identified, as an aside, he kept talking about crooked Hillary.
Yeah.
And that was never answered. None of those people were able to answer any of Trump. They didn't think they needed to go down to his level of debris and gutter in order to answer. And lo and behold, he was down there having a good time. And he ended up getting the nomination. He got the nomination. I then started projecting how he could possibly beat Hillary. I did not come to the conclusion enough that I predicted he would win, but I certainly said it's a mistake for us not to take him seriously.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately for us, nobody went to Michigan, nobody went to Wisconsin, nobody went to Pennsylvania and asked those non-voters, non-traditional voters, questions. Yeah. And they were the ones that beat us. And the pollsters got licked in the process.
Yeah.
And the pollsters are still wrong. They're saying Trump's numbers are so bad and all that business, but they're still asking the Willie Browns of the world, what do you think about Trump? Well, you don't need to ask me what I think about Trump. It's obvious what I think about Trump.
Well, you know, I have so many more questions for you, but I've got to go and preach a sermon. So, so we'll just have to have you come back again sometime. I think one of the things I wanted to know about before we left, though, is just I love the section that you have on film whenever you write, and I just wonder if you could just say a few words about just what the movies mean to you and why that's such an interest of yours.
Well, the movies have, all my life, the business of going to movies has been a part of me. Even when I lived in Mineola, they had 2 little bitty theaters across the street from each other. One was called the Leroy and the Select. They had 2 separate entrances. They had an entrance for colored and they had an entrance for white. And the coloreds had about 15 to 20 seats in what we called the buzzards roof. And we literally, and you could pay a nickel and you could stay all day in there and you'd see everything over and over again. And that's what I did for fun. I went to movies over and over again, and I really had in mind one time, I didn't like the idea that I never saw any minority cowboy except Tonto. And everybody else was white. And I loved, however, being a cowboy. I was a cowboy. I had a horse. I had all those kinds of things, and I was into movies, really into movies. But they were all, movies that were nothing like they are today. As I evolved in San Francisco, I still went to movies. When we had like movies in this town, Uptown Theater on Steiner and Sutter.
Yeah.
We had the Elroy. We had all these separate movie houses all over the city. They were not very expensive. I went to movies. That was my deal. I did not go play golf. I did not go, to the country club. I didn't go to any of the things. I didn't play tennis. I didn't play those things. I went to movies, and I still go to movies. If I get 2 hours, and no matter where I am in the city, there's always a theater somewhere close by, I don't even look to see what's playing. I go in to see what's on the screen time-wise.
Right,
And I
right.
go in, and if the
Or
movie...
fits your schedule.
That's right. If the movie hasn't, and I go in sometimes after the movie starts. I may arrive there 5 or 10 minutes after it starts, but I can figure out quickly what went on before. I may not have seen the scene, but I can figure out based on where the story happens to be.
So what do you
and
love
I
about
only
it?
go to movies alone. I don't want anybody interfering with my watching the movies, period. And that's my life. I am into movies. And I see probably 150 movies a year.
Wow. And so it's those people, it's the way that people interact with each other, the spectacle of it, that's what you love?
I love
Or it's
the
just
artistic imagination. I love the fictional account. And I'm now recognizing that almost every film now is based on a true story. Come on, give me a break. Based on a true story. I care whether or not King Kong was really out there. Give me a break. So I love movies, and I hate critics.
Yeah.
I hate critics. They write about the lighting wasn't good and all that. No, I went in there to be entertained. I didn't go in there for light. I come to Grace Cathedral for light.
Thanks be to God. Thank you so much. Such a blessing to have you.
All right.